Lucy McAllister is an assistant professor of sustainability and environmental studies at Denison University. Her research focuses on media representations of climate change and previously on the political and economic drivers of the global electronic waste stream. Lucy, thank you so much for taking the time today.
Happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
So to start, I want to ask you about your research on climate change communication. How has climate change communication changed in the media in recent years?
Great question. It's changed a lot. So, I guess in terms of speaking to my specific work over time, it used to be in terms of scientific representations of climate change in the media. Max Boykoff, around 2007, coined this term balance as bias. So the media is always looking to be objective, and they're reporting and present sort of balanced viewpoints. And so they were doing this 50-50 view of climate change, but that's incredibly the science of climate change, but that's very misleading because 99 I think it's now 99.8% of scientists agree that, an anthropogenic climate change. So that was really problematic in the early 2000s in terms of how people were understanding the problem. And so recent work I've done, we re-examined that original study and looked at how it's changed over time. And there's good news. The accuracy of reporting, at least in the countries we looked at, we only looked at 5 English-speaking countries, so there's some limitations, but our data showed that accurate reporting vastly outweighed inaccurate reporting by a factor of 9 to 1 across all years we studied. And it was a longitudinal, quite a long time period. So that's really good news. But that's just in the print media. And so there is this a really important trend in what climate change communication is like today. Obviously, anyone who watches the news, if you're watching Fox News versus MSNBC, gets a very different viewpoint on the science. Fox News grossly misrepresents scientific inaccuracy. And so someone watching Fox News would have very little to no understanding of climate science. It's hugely inaccurate. So it makes sense from their perspective if they're not seeing this as a problem that needs to be addressed by politicians, if that's your only news source. So we do see from the current administration outright denial, obstructionism, and sort of these discourses of delay that really focus on undermining support for climate policy. But there are discourses, it's important to identify those. Individuals receive all sorts of information all the time, and so that doesn't necessarily translate into behavioral change. So yeah, it's kind of a mixed story. The accuracy of print and online media has improved over time, but that's not necessarily the case in social media or television or radio. So more work needs to be done. But I think it's important to note that the majority of Americans, this is according to the Pew Research Center, support climate policy. So in general, there's just a need for more funding for journalists to continue doing this work. And it's at a time, there's more information in general, extreme speech, and just a greater threat to not only journalists, but scientists doing this work. And at the very same time, we're seeing these increasing impacts of climate change that scientists have been telling us about for a very long time, starting, with Jim Hansen. And along with the severe costs of climate change.
So, just following up on the types of communication that you looked at, you said in print media, we've gotten better, or there's more consensus among what is being printed and put out into the world that anthropogenic climate change is real, and is like the conversation is maybe more solution oriented. Is it maybe the nature of visual media, video that makes us think in like us versus them, or the 50-50 view that you described? Is it a format problem, or is it something that can be resolved simply by fostering a discussion of solutions rather than any debate about whether or not the science is real?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think in terms of the 50-50 view, that's just bad journalism these days. So that's just climate literacy or scientific understanding. But I mean, it's really hard for these journalists. They have shortened timelines, less resources, a lot of pressure. The need for advertisements, clickbait. They're under a lot of resource constraints, and so that can really impact the quality of the reporting and how it's represented in the media. So I think that's important to understand. Um, so the visual question is really interesting. And there's a lot of great work on it. Sylvia Hayes is someone who's looked at sort of visual communication of climate change in the UK. Um, I mean, the classic representation is the polar bear, right? That everyone sees, and yeah, that can be really misleading because you're very distant. Like when most people think of it, they think of the polar bear. But why are we thinking of the animal and not the humans, right? Impacted indigenous populations, people all around the world facing extreme harms from this, and it also makes it feel very far removed. This ice sheet, so people don't it's a very complex and wicked problem and so hard to convey. Um, so yeah, it is. You can have problematic imagery. Again, these photographers have limited resources, or maybe they can't, go into a hospital because of data privacy and get images of people suffering from heat stroke, but they can go to a beach. So it's pretty complex in terms of what individuals are able to do. It's a long story, but I think it's a great question, and there's a lot of great work on it to dig into.
Yeah. You also mentioned the kind of the clickbait nature of some of this content. Is part of the just thinking about the difference between print media and the online and you know news videos that we're accustomed to, is part of it that advertiser driven business model versus a subscription driven business model where there's an expectation from the subscribers that they're receiving facts rather than something that might be just by design inflammatory.
Yeah, I think it's a great point because I mean it plays a huge role in shaping the content. And I think what's ideal is someone is looking across a variety of sources to sort of inform your thoughts on the issue and digging into research. But you made another great point about solutions-oriented journalism. It's really tough because it's really hard facts and depressing about what's happening and what's going to continue happening. And so I think that it really, it's hard. There's so many issues to worry about these days, you just want to hide away. Um, Especially when you're only hearing the negative news all the time. I mean, it's hard to live like that. So I think it's not only going to a variety of sources, but really turning towards the solutions journalism. Yes, we know the problem. We've known these problems of climate science for a long time. So now we know that we need to turn to the solutions because there's a lot we can do, and there's a lot of cool new innovative entrepreneurs, technologies, solutions, policies, work out there, amazing stories at the local level, people doing incredible things. And so here, I think that reframing is critical for moving forward.
Yeah. I also wanted to ask you about behaviors. And so how does the media influence behaviors, thinking about like approaches to sustainability?
Yeah, great question. I think there's a lot of in the academic world. There's some scholars they've named this. I'm forgetting the exact name, but they've dubbed this term tactical framing. So that you often see this, especially in television news reporting on all the across the ideological spectrum. But basically, you have people talking about the Democrats said this, the Republicans said this, making it all about the politics. And that tactical framing then really limits, well, what's the policy? What's actually the content? We don't know. We know what the Democrats said, we know what the Republicans said, but we don't know about the content of the actual policy, the implications, what it means. So there's far less information about that that would be actually helpful and practical to people, and more just about what political parties are saying about it. So that plays a role, like so many things. Your political ideology plays a role, how you see yourself, or what the impacts of this mean for you personally. It can also, many of the people who it may not, they score very high on science tests, mathematics tests. So it's less about, that aspect of it. It can be more about who they look up to and what those people are saying, um, and how that plays on their ideas of themselves. So it gets really complicated about why people may deny climate change or obstruct climate change, even if they, understand climate science. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, yeah, and I'm curious if if there's anything that points to like effective communication strategies that are uniquely motivating, or thinking about like I know that in my area there have been days where it's like a bike to work day, or a event-based communication that helps encourage new behavior. But I'm curious if there's anything that's more uh, more effective than just a one day thing that really gets people thinking differently about sustainability.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, well, in terms of climate change, right? It's so hard because it is a long-term problem, and we're going to continue dealing with it. So there's sort of this fatigue associated with it.
Mm.
We've been hearing about it for a long time, and how urgent it is, and how problematic it is. And part of this communication is really what's been problematic is it's framed as an environmental problem, a sustainability problem. But that's really inaccurate. What it is, it's a everything people problem, and new and
Mm.
emerging strategies are about, there's a lot of discussion of the costs of action. And that's true. And it's very important for a just transition. Some people will lose jobs, but what that communication strategy does, it really is disingenuous, because I want to emphasize the cost of inaction, right? So
Yeah.
it's not just economic, but it's health related, the emotional toll, and the environmental impact. So you have, in terms of health, is a new, very innovative strategy around communicating these issues, because it's impacting the health of people born today at all points of their lives. So even doctors talking about this, it's going to threaten food production, food security, increased transmission of diseases, heat-related illness and death, forced migration, civil conflict, mental health impacts, and potential work hours lost. I think if you look at, it's a great source, Lancet Countdown on Health and Climate Change. 45 billion work hours were lost globally compared to a 2000 baseline in 2018. So, it's just, that's just the health aspect of it that needs to be emphasized, because people don't necessarily understand the impacts of climate change on their health. It's not an environmental problem, it's a health problem. So, in addition, like, thinking about extreme weather events, disasters. These are tragic and severe, people losing their lives, their homes, everything is lost in these events. And it takes years to rebuild, the infrastructure, the psychological impact of losing everything. This is from a statistic from 2021, but there were 20 separate billion-dollar weather and climate disaster events across the United States. 20 separate billion-dollar disasters, climate disaster events in the US. And that was in 2021. It's gotten worse since then. And recently, the United States administration has decided to stop tracking these costs, which is problematic, because you look at these, it's just if when they started tracking this in the 1980s, and like since then, I think it's sustained the total cost of there was 323 events. Since then, it exceeds $2.195 trillion. Like, this is not an environmental problem. This is an economic problem. This is a health problem. So I think innovative new communication strategies communicating these issues will actually de-emphasize the environmental impact. That hasn't necessarily resonated. People are dealing with such stress in their day-to-day lives, getting to work, paying bills. So meeting people where they are and what they need and helping make sense of this. What does climate change mean for them? What are the impacts in their community? How can they adapt? How can they respond when these events occur? And they will occur, and they will occur with increasing intensity and frequency. So how can we help these people, meet their daily needs and respond to these events, which are going to keep coming? And all the ways we can do to make a difference, because we can make a huge difference. And it's going to do the types of solutions out there, which is so cool, as these are things that are going to improve our lives. So I think that's also a story that needs to be told, retold. These are things that many things, solutions to climate change, improve well-being, quality of life, mental health, just make it nicer to be alive, So I think telling those stories it will also maybe help impact behavioral change, but also, it's not just the individual, but again, the structural changes that are needed to improve our daily lives and help address this problem in a significant way. So also not blaming the individual who has so little control over all of this, which often happens again in the media, because, recycling is fantastic, but that's not going to help us address climate change. So what are things people can do? Something that more useful tips, of what people can do to make a difference that really will make an impact. I think that's what's needed.
Yeah. Well, you answered my question about how we like what needs to change about how we approach climate change communication, and you also mentioned recycling there at the end. So I want to switch gears a little bit and ask you about your previous research on global electronics waste streams and commodity chains. Can you talk about what is the global electronics waste stream and commodity chain, and why is it important?
Yeah, great question. So basically, electronic waste, it's discarded electronics, computers, phones, tablets, anything with a battery or a plug, anything you can plug into the wall. So why is this a problem? It's one way to think about it's one of the fastest growing waste streams globally. They talk about it as the e-waste tsunami. Um, it's, the global e-waste monitor from a UN agency has great data on this, but 62 million tons of e-waste were produced in 2022, and that's up 82% from 2010, and it's just on track to rise another 32% to 82 million tons by 23. When I was a PhD student studying this, it was in the projections were in like 40 million. A million metric tons. This is just escalating so quickly. And it's not just about the waste, which we often forget about in our day-to-day lives. You put in the trash can, you forget about it. But what's another way to think about this is, that's billions of dollars worth of strategically valuable resources that are just being dumped. You think about electronic waste, this is special, super trash. It's not just normal trash. This stuff contains precious metals, materials, rare earth minerals, things that are extremely valuable, and they're just being dumped. So is an incredible opportunity for entrepreneurs to make a lot of money, and many are. Actually, a company out of Babson, he created the waste bins.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
Jim Poss, I believe is the name, Big Belly Solar. His new
Yeah.
work is all on this, and he's doing quite well. Um, so I think that that, and especially, thinking about the circular economy, increasing political conflict, certain countries cutting off access to materials, this growing nationalism, or that like and need for independence. And so there's a lot of valuable resources we need for our everyday lives that are just being dumped in the trash. So it's a big problem in many ways. And then there's a whole other aspect to this of the severe environmental injustice of the people making this stuff, disposing of it, because a lot of the disposal of the electronic waste stream is in the informal market and less developed or rapidly developing countries, of people who are already disproportionately burdened by climate change, who are the least historically responsible for causing the problem. So the injustices, they have their own e-waste to deal with. The injustices, the health, the environmental impacts are severe, tragic, long-reaching. So there's many facets to this issue, in addition to the economic costs and just of these strategically valuable resources. There's many reasons why this is such an important issue. Yeah.
Well, I'm just to follow up. I'm curious what you think about the you mentioned Big Belly Solar, and just thinking about the creators of these electronic products. I wonder how you think about like who is best positioned to um, deal with or not deal with or um, solve the problem of this massive waste by either making it part of their business operations, or you mentioned like entrepreneurs getting involved, but it seems like something that the people that are creating the products would be uniquely positioned to you know find ways to get those products back and use them as inputs somehow. How do you think about that?
Yeah, great question. There's a lot of companies who are already doing that work. Hewlett Packard is actually doing a lot of innovative work in this area. They don't talk about it much. No one, they're not necessarily known for this work, but they're definitely a leader in the space. I think that um, making it open access, easy to repair, they're really interested in having high quality products and being transparent with their customers so that either they or certified third party, that creates more jobs, can repair them. So they actually getting a good quality product. So I think, you know, increasingly it will become more important for these companies to take these materials back. I think the economics haven't quite played out to make that make sense for these big companies because they haven't needed to yet, but they will. In this world of ours, we only have one planet, right? So increasingly they will have to deal with this more and more. More companies are taking their materials back. But I think new business models, where do we really need to own the phone? Is it really ours if we can't fix it anyway?
Hmm.
There's this whole right to repair movement. So maybe, you take a phone, but you don't really own it, you return it, then the company, like you're saying, a sort of subscription model, the company then can reuse the materials, take it back. And I think that couldn't be a way forward. Uh, just higher quality products that last longer.
Yeah.
All of this, but it's just, they're getting cheaper and cheaper to make. These sleek new skinny phones are harder and harder to take apart. They're not built for reuse. They're built to sort of fall apart. So you buy another one. The company makes money that way. And that's a model that's worked for a long time. for these companies, but it's going to change because of the limiting factor of our resources and these political conflicts, supply chain shortages, blockades, all these issues. So companies will increasingly have to deal with this. And there's some innovators who already are, like Hewlett Packard, I point to as sort of a fantastic company dealing with these issues.
Awesome. Well, the last thing I want to ask you about is what you see the future looking like, both in terms of what we were just talking about, but also in terms of climate communication and sustainability more broadly.
So I think great question. I think we've touched on this a bit before, but sort of the solutions-oriented approach, solutions journalism. The Anthropocene is a great magazine out of Boulder, Colorado. Solutions journalism. You can go to their website, and it has actually media from all around the world, and they filter it for these sort of solutions-oriented criteria. So it's a great for all types of media. They have rural outlets, elite press, or like New York Times, or all these big outlets, and they filter for all these journalists and stories that have a solutions-oriented approach. So just telling stories that empower people and engage them, because there's so much we can do. There's so much opportunity, including economic opportunity. And there's so many ways that we can make a difference. So I think in terms of that's a future that I hope we move into, of telling these local stories, these hopeful stories, inspiring stories, and focus on the opportunities. That's the best way forward to keep dealing with this issue, which we're going to continue dealing with. So why not focus on the ways we can make a difference and not, yeah.
Yeah. Well, Lucy, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today and for sharing your insights and your research and your wisdom. And I hope we can continue the conversation down the road.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time and for having me.